Dear reader unknown, may your spirit guide my pen, may the ink flow true. From my first full round trip, I have just returned with too much to share. Countless tales of adventure have crossed my ears on the streets, been skimmed by my weary eyes before bed. One way or another, you always seem to be mentioned. Recently, I was offered the chance to make a trip of my own. I was hoping I could find it, or that it would strike me. It, you know it, the answer to the question, what to do? Nay, swap it with you, switch what to who, and you'll know perfectly well I belong at the zoo. Not amused? Do forgive me, sometimes I cannot help myself. However, if you wish to join in, you'll be convinced my games, base as they may seem, are rather lovely. Enough nonsense, you say? I agree. My preamble will seize post-haste, and to the heart of the matter will go. But first, these 3 requests, I beg of you. Request? Who am I, you say, the writer, to ask a thing of you, the reader? No doubt my fate remains in your hands. As they were required a ways back down the line, you may feel these simple courtesies go without saying. However, a number of today's popular figures appear, given their presentiments, perfectly willing to let these 3 gems slide back into the murk. And so in order. First, believe in the words that have been written. Secondly, please continue believing until you can bear the suffering no longer, or until you have reached the end, coming soon enough, a rare promise. The third and final great burden of faith. Reserve judgment for the time it is called. I found work keeping the peace where everyone goes at night. At night I do my best work, so the job suited me. Odd hours of sleep have muddled my sense of time, and made it so a dream of you may strike no matter when. After a long night I got home, and brought my dinner, a bowl from El Perioso Burrito, upstairs to the place of my friend and fellow bouncer, George, where we commenced the ritual sacrament. The night before our trip, we partook in what our great teacher Paul, a true friend of art, calls the dangling conversation. George and I agreed we were searching for the same thing, though we could not describe it exactly. George mentioned that he had procured 6 mystical white cubes, the best around, tested pure, crystalline in structure, provided by the illustrious, faceless Simo. I told George, for my first real trip, I was more comfortable with an organic alternative. When I got to George's, he told me Willis had some of the mushrooms that I thought would drop me on my desired path. In a haze, George tried to wake Willis, who was sprawled asleep on the floor. Unable to wake him or locate the magic mushrooms, and seemingly without thought, George grabbed the mystical cubes from his room, and on the carpet opened the foil package. "Sid, bro, let's drop Sid." "Sid? The gypsy queen? What? Bro, you make no sense sometimes. Let's go." I was scared. I figured the boundaries of space and time were what kept you and I apart. My greatest fear was that when dimensions dissolved, you would stay hidden, and that I would continue to wander in the dark night without aim. I swallowed my fear. Whether or not I was ready to face the monsters of my own inception no longer mattered. When, if they appeared, I would either face them or curl into a fetal ball. What a relief. George said he would meet me downstairs. I put the lid on my dinner, retreated to my living room, put on a record, and lay back on my couch. I became hyper-aware of my sensations. I did not know what to expect. Riddled with anticipation, wondering if I was feeling it yet, I called for George. He told me he would be right down. I listened to another song. No George, so I called again. After the same answer and a third song, I called once more. "We'll be there in 2 seconds, more like 5, he said. George carried Willis through my door. A few days before, Willis had sharpened his blade to a fine edge. Carelessly practicing his draw, Willis drew his long sword, slicing into his own leg above the knee. "You woke him up?" "He dosed me." Willis released a sigh as he sat down on the couch and struggled to elevate his leg. Shortly thereafter, he hobbled outside for a cigarette. George expressed his desire to leave for the woods. Willis and I informed him getting to the woods would be difficult, given Willis's wound. George insisted that we did not understand, and that we had to go. I proposed we stay in and listen to some of my favorite old songs. Willis thought that sounded cool. George was in a frenzy, preparing to go, though Willis and I were still waiting to be told his plan. Eventually he sat, burned some more tree, and got in with the drums. We were jamming. Willis introduced me to one of his favorites, Marquee Moon. The realization dawned on us that we had the technology to summon a ride, which would carry us the first leg of our journey. The technology amazed me slightly less than the conviction with which George actually considered carrying Willis the entire distance to the woods, some ways away. I finished my dinner. Our provisions, tree to burn, tree burning tools, stolen incense courtesy of my roommate's mother, my notebook and my pen all went into George's pack. The car dropped us at the side of the road. On the other side of the fence was the graveyard. As soon as the car was gone, George said, "I'm thirsty." We have forgotten water, I thought, and my throat feels dry. The horror. I imagined clambering through cracked lips, lost in the woods. We began to walk. Lagging behind, Willis made a proposition. "Let's head to the river." I did not know a river ran through our neck of the woods, but I cannot say I was surprised. "That's perfect," I said, holding George back to let Willis catch up. "We'll drink from the river." Determined and undeniably suffering, Willis reminded me that the river was far off as he put his arm around George's shoulder. George, in his excitement to get to the woods, nearly ran Willis off the sidewalk down onto the empty road. This while ironically trying his best to support Willis's weight. After a difficult climb, Willis announced we were at the gate. Willis gave us a fair warning about the Arboretum being patrolled at night. My imaginary demons had yet to toy with my perceptions, and I was excited to explore. We started down the path. Soon, trees on both sides blended into a canopy above our heads. The whole path was cast in the shadows of the leaves. To encourage Willis, but mostly myself, I played a song by Van the Man and told Willis to listen for a line that always stones me. Willis tripped against the lumber siding of the path and barely kept himself from falling face first. I pulled him up. The three of us walked arm in arm down steps laid into the path until we leveled out and Willis no longer needed our help. I was dancing, determined to sing until morning, when George, then Willis, asked that I stop. They wanted me to turn off the light I was shining on the path. What could be going on, I thought, while I kept on singing. They insisted I stop and turn off the music. Seriously. Seriously, there was no one out to get us, I thought. George shushed me and pointed, asking a hunched Willis if he saw it too. Allowing myself the notion that it would make them less anxious, I turned off the music. Like lightning, I snapped my head towards a spot in the trees where I thought I heard a critter scurrying away. Looking back at the same exact dark void from whence we came, the looming threat zapped us all immobile. Imagining the chaos that would ensue if we were caught, I began dreaming up stories to tell my mom from the station. Upon settling for a meek line, I smiled. "Tell the truth" flashed through my head with bluesy resonance. Willis and George said that they saw a searchlight, but I peered further into the darkness. Seeing nothing, I continued dancing along the path. We climbed into a clearing. Still, it was very dark. On top of a small, dry, and dirty hill, set amongst bigger, more grassy hills, Willis sat to rest his leg. George eventually agreed to sit. He could not wait to get to the river, though I was not sure he knew which way to go. Burning tree, as well as 2 of the 5 incense sticks George stabbed into the dirt, I watched our fragrant smoke waft to the sky. I found myself wishing it well received. The dim stars and cloud-covered moon failed to make much of an impression, though my vision was beginning to really latch onto shadows. I sat on the hill, legs crossed and back straight. I closed my eyes, and under the lid, I saw black diamonds in a red, green, and blue fractal field. I just began to hallucinate, I said. Immediately, I reached into the pack for my notebook and pen. "Turn that shit off." George reacted to the artificial light I was using to write. Tearing the lit and unlit incense from the dirt, he sprang up and spun around, rearing to go towards the river. Useless, I sat writing, while Willis tried to stop George, who threw the incense on the ground and started to wrestle Willis. Obviously forgetting his wounded leg, George brought Willis to the ground and Willis pushed him off. "Maniac," Willis moaned. "You've got to be kidding." George rolled on the thin, sharp grass and stood, all the while continuing to laugh. From night arose dawn. "Let's go to the river," Willis said to me, grunting to his feet. I tried to finish writing my thought, but I was drawn with my friends to the river. Willis steadily dragged his leg. Fields of wildflowers slid past, the colors muddled in the absence of light. We marched on to the dying sounds of the crickets. Many turns later, following another sharp descent, we wound up by a bench near a swamp. I liked the swamp's mossy cover and how the droopy branches wove through the fog. The shadows once again managed to fascinate me most. The drooping branches of a willow projected a strange scene on the ground below, punctured by upshot roots. Unable to remember what I was trying to write on the hill, I gave up writing until after the trip, convincing myself I could remember, that I would remember the important parts. Any sort of swamp creature could have hidden in that dense fog. I wondered how much further we had to walk. Curious, George wandered about touching things in the dark, snapping twigs and cracking branches. Willis sat next to me on the bench and pointed to a spot in another tree. "You see that?" I looked where he was pointing and shook my head. "What is it?" "Never mind," said Willis, glancing around. "Where's George?" George reappeared from behind the bench, giving us a start. We corralled him through a small clearing. At the edge of the clearing we came to a fork, each way leading to a different neck of the woods. For whatever reason, George insisted we go left. Upon reaching the bank of the river, I was enchanted. We all were. In the first light of morning, the river flowed under the silent mist. Bugs zoomed over the surface in polygonal patterns that changed too quickly to map. Willis went down to the water first, took off his shoes and dipped his toes. I followed him down and noticed that if I looked closely at the leaves, they twirled. It then became rather hard to take my eyes off the shallow rapids. Willis, barely keeping his balance, wandered out on a line of big rocks above the surface. George waded straight in, immediately soaking his pants. As if he'd never seen water, he stared down at the surface, presumably at his reflection. Distracted by a school of minnows, George splashed around trying to catch hold of one. I carefully pulled up my pant legs and folded my socks and my shoes before following Willis out onto the rocks. As I sat and dipped my feet in, the water surged between my toes. How strange my curled toes appeared, distorted through the aquatic lens. Slowly my vision crept deeper, past my reflection and feet, to the stones embedded below. I pleaded with Willis not to fall, and hurt himself as he limped upstream. Following the example of brave Willis, I got in knee-deep. Next, like Willis, I cut my hands in the river, and with a great sense of ceremony, splashed cold water over my face. My parched lips were relieved. Bird calls echoed back and forth across the river. Against the hills and trees, we were drawn to the middle of the flowing water, where the river ran deepest and the song of the birds sounded best. Willis, George, and I imitated their calls, then howled like wolves. A hard wind from the north blew a flight of flapping, quacking ducks in over the trees. The clouds separated from the pale blue sky as the light built slow and steady. In the heart of the river was a fallen tree that refused to be washed away. Growing from the dirt surrounding the fallen trees pulled up roots, were the roots of a young tree. The formation of trees streamlined in the east into the rocky river bed. We all met under the tree. We tried, I cannot say for how long, to figure out how to get out of the river and onto the natural island tree fort. After watching George act rashly and fall, I pondered his mistaken route to moment. Avoiding thorny bushes, I scampered up next to the tree, spread my arms, and roared. George, following my course, rushed up to meet me, and we let out a yell together. Willis, watching us from the river, doubled over with laughter. George wanted to keep going higher, so he climbed up the young tree. From in the tree, George gave voice to a sporadic series of intuitions. My experience. You don't understand. No, it is impossible. To feel it too. You do not understand what I mean. I faced opposite him, west, watching the newly visible white clouds fragment into spinning gray, blue, and white equilateral triangles at the edges. I wanted my turn up high in the tree, so I climbed. After walking around the entire fort, Willis lay in a shady alcove, formed by the trunk of the fallen old tree, with his leg up on a log. Look, he said, pointing to a soft hue blushing in the east. The first hue rose, lifted by a second brighter, more orange hue. I wondered what to call the colors. Where they met seemed easiest to define, as a nice peach. Willis pointed out dead swans from the base of our island. Where? I asked. There, he pointed. I see 'em. That is so sad, said George. Why did they die? I never saw the dead swans from up in the growing tree. I did see collections of yellow-tinted foam, stuck to rocks and river weeds, that bobbed up and down on the surface. Neither my critical eye nor the inanimate nature of the catastrophe did a thing to ease the impact of the sight. All of a sudden I had to go higher than George had gone. Balancing to avoid disaster, I shifted my weight and climbed another step with each foot. I felt wobbly, so I hopped right back to the ground. On our island, in the middle of the river, Willis found a sturdy branch to use as a walking stick for the walk back. At the base of the young tree, looking west again, George and I shared a view with an arm wrapped around the other's shoulder. We each expressed our gratitude and awe for the moment. Just think, before people could speak, or think, or dream, they could have stood at the heart of a river, much like this one, and experience, well, God only knows what they experience. I said to no one in particular, as it turned out my speech had not captured George's attention. Instead, he seemed fixated on a V of 5 current-churning white V's that constantly broke over 5 stones. A penny for your thoughts? I asked George. George turned to look at me. It's wild, bro. The symmetry. Wild, was all he had to say. I looked up to the puffy clouds. Between 2 low-hanging clouds was a blue hole. 2 white triangles connected, then spiraled down from the hole right at me. I felt a feathery weight land on my chest like an almost unbearable message. Mercurial, awfully mercurial, I thought to myself after my breath returned. George closely inspected his own hands and arms. The sky expanded with the light, and the bird calls seemed farther off in the distance. Looking back east, the great ball of fire outlined itself between the trunks, branches, and lower leaves of the furthest trees. Out west, where the river bent north, I looked deep into the woods. A crooked, nearly horizontal tree hanging over the bank jumped out at me. Where the light hit the trunk's veins, a confounding effect manifested itself. The bark emanated snake-like lines of green light upwards. The leaves all seemed ready to ooze toxic green goo. I tried looking past the trees to see if there were any early morning joggers prancing along the path cut through the woods, but could not see beyond the mutant fluorescent effect connecting the trunk's veins to the leaves. Spinning around, overwhelmed by the impenetrable layers of the forest, I noticed the young tree bore fruit. Red slime that coated the seeds gushed out when I squished a single small purple berry between my thumb and forefinger. I popped the berry in my mouth and barely chewed. I hoped it would not kill me. Before grinding the skin to a pulp, I gulped, and the fruit was not too bitter. Full daylight was fast approaching. The entire sun was in the trees. 2 old ladies walked by us with their dogs. We should go soon, Willis said. George and I ignored him. I climbed back in the tree to watch the sun rise. My left foot curled around the groove where the trunk split. My right foot was perched on a branch pointing east. I grabbed another branch with my left hand for support, and my right hand was free. White light began shining through the gaps between branches. The light broke in prisms, Each contained a full rainbow of color that angled to the surface and danced atop the rapids. Oddly, the triangle at the center of my vision appeared very black. George began to thrash about. "Let's burn some tree," he insisted. He picked up a rock and threw it at the fallen trunk. I heard Bart crunch and a gasp. I looked down to my left to see George falling ass first from the fallen trunk into the water, and the forest echoed with laughter. "I got to go to work," said Willis, who worked as a maintenance man at the market. "I have to open up." A displeased George interjected, "Fuck that," patting his soaked pants and examining the scrapes on his arms. "Come on, we've all got responsibilities," said Willis. Again, George did not wish to listen. He looked to me. I supported the humble stance of Willis. "He's got to open the doors." Opening doors. What a noble profession, I thought to myself as I looked skyward, giving a tip of the old imaginary cap to Aldous and Jim. Willis stood. Using his cane for support, he maneuvered his way back into the open river and moved towards the bank. George followed and teased Willis's slow progress. I was shredding on my vintage Sunburst Gibson. My priceless Les Paul Custom, the Air model, felt right in tune. They called for me to get down. I told them I was going to wait for the sun to rise. The sun was rounding the tops of the trees. In the distance where the river wound south, the woods seemed to carry on undivided. The closer I looked, the more my visuals disintegrated and I shielded my eyes. George was helping Willis onto the bank, and he called to me once more to get down. Looking all around, trying to capture everything, casting good, beautiful light, I raised my right hand in a fist and shouted, "Are we not all gods unto ourselves?" A swirling breeze rustled me like another leaf in the tree. Finally, the sun cleared the trees. As if commanded, the clouds parted, revealing the whole thing. In the center of the sun, a black circle, about the size of a moon, appeared. A neon pink zigzag in an upside-down pink triangle leapt out from the darkness, then, like early filaments, burnt out, and there was only a black hole. The middle of the hole appeared infinitely further away than the edge of the sun itself, which seemed so close. From high in the tree, at the heart of the river, I realized the black bullseye was in my sight. For as long as I could, I searched its depths, until the sun, shining forth from the dark, brought tears to blind my eyes. I found no answer to share, only the warmth of your light. Love, Steve and Sam.